The EU5 economy system isn't very simple. For one, when you build a workshop in EU4, you would just make the money the workshop quote-unquote produced. But now in EU5, you can only make money taxing the profit from the workshop. There is of course a lot more going on, but instead of info dumping to you how market access, proximity cost, control, trade goods supply and demand and all that works, well, today I want to give you 5 tips, in sequential order basically, for how you could go about going from a broke, backwater nation to a prospering, rich one. Anyway, before we get into the video proper, well, a like would be appreciated and a subscription would be amazing. And as always, if you're buying EU5 or anything else in the Paradox store, please use code LemonCake. It does help support the channel, but enough self-shilling. Let's get into the game. So here I have an Iron Man save from the 1st of January 1500. I've played, 163 years so far, just under, because technically the game started in April. I was playing as Scotland, united Scotland, annexed my subjects, grabbed man, and basically sat around in Scotland, not doing much. Now, this actually isn't an economy run purely, shall we say. Now, I need money to achieve my goals, but I'm working on, shall we say, something else, right? We'll get to that. Hopefully this video is done sooner rather than later, specifically on what I'm working here. But I just want to point out that while I am looking at economy in the specific save, I'm not exactly hyper-fixating on economy. Most of my focus is on this, right? And the other thing to, of course, bear in mind is I am very much holding myself back by sticking to Scotland. From a, dare I say, roleplay perspective, if I wanted to expand into England, it would be very profitable. My proximity from my capital is looking pretty good already, especially so as my control, meaning that most of this land, basically Northumbria as a whole, will be quite profitable, and frankly, even probably up to London, I'd still be able to extract value out of the land as well as all of Ireland if I was playing this game conventionally and how I should be, dare I say, in a profit-maximizing environment, but I'm not. With all those disclaimers said, I am still, as an economy point, feeling myself in a pretty healthy state. 381 income in 1500 isn't ridiculously amazing, but it's certainly enough money to get by and achieve my goals, at least I hope. And while it is true that I've kind of inflated this number by not increasing stability at the moment, I was also saving up for more city upgrades. That being said, I should probably get my stability fixed. All I'm trying to say, though, is that while this isn't some ridiculous amount of money, and you could certainly be richer if you are more aggressively playing the game, I would say this is certainly also enough money for most goals. That being said, let's now use this save as an example and specifically talk through each and every single one of the 5 tips I'm going to offer you today. And for tip number 1, and this is going to primarily impact early game scaling, well, that is going to be build RGOs, or resource gathering operations. Every single tile in the game, literally all of them, has an RGO associated. So for example, Edinburgh is sturdy grains, Dunbar is also sturdy grains. Of course, I picked the 2 examples that are the same. Duns has wool, and so on and so forth. Dumfries has, for example, fiber crops. Excellent. Well, even in the most worst extreme case scenarios, RGOs are practically always, and I do mean practically always, if not literally always, profitable to build. Why? Well, let's break down one of the worst possible RGOs at the moment for me to build, the sturdy grain RGO. If I were to upgrade this, I'm going to increase the supply of sturdy grains in the market. And at the moment, the sturdy grains in the Edinburgh market are very oversupplied. There's 54 being supplied and 22 being demanded, meaning that the base price of one, which is already terrible, has crashed down to 0.4. In essence, meaning that I would employ 1,000 people to make 0.4 ducats of tax base. Doesn't sound great, especially when you factor in that we are affecting this by control. Now, control in this location happens to be pretty good. My capital is right outside after all. But at the end of the day, this is a pretty not great setup after all, right? As far as RGOs go, most are going to be better than sturdy grains. Now, sturdy grains is also deceptive. It provides you with food, so it is good for feeding the nation, but imagine an RGO that is extra terrible, doesn't even have food, and it's selling for 0.4. Basically the worst case of market oversupply for an RGO. Well, my question to you is, what are those peasants doing if they're not working an RGO? They are working in subsistence agriculture, right? That's these gentlemen over here. And if you look at this food breakdown, subsistence agriculture produces food, but very inefficiently. This is a high food producing province. It is rural. There are a bunch of food production techs. There's decent development here. But let's say you've extra focused on food and there's a famine, right? Which will give you the max price of food instead of the current min price. So if we bump this 84% up to 100, let's say you've really hyper-focused food in a traditional economy, and you've gone even above and beyond, and now you have 3,000 laborers making 3 food, right? So you've hyper-focused on this food production, but you're still somehow in a famine. But anyway, again, we're taking the extreme of both cases here. And so you're in a state where of those 3,000 laborers, sorry, 3,200. You actually have 3,000 employed and making 3 food just to make our math a little bit easier. Well, how much is that 1 food per 1,000 laborers selling for? Well, at famine prices of 0.2, 1 food will sell for 0.2. Meanwhile, the worst possible RGO, without any extra food associated with it, this sturdy grain, is going to be selling for 0.4. You've doubled your money in this extreme case of a very high-producing food province that does not have food production built in the middle of a famine, which, again, as you may guess, doesn't tend to happen often, and comparing this to an artificially deflated RGO, a sturdy grain that doesn't have any food production attached to it, and even in these both cases of extremes, you're doubling your money by building RGOs. The reality of the situation is it just only keeps getting better from here. Now, I've crashed a lot of prices for my RGOs as part of my economy maxing. So livestock, which would normally be a decent RGO at 1.5, is still selling at 0.53, but that's still 0.53. Again, it just keeps getting better. If you take a look at a good RGO, for example, copper, where, well, look, I was able to supply my market with copper, but it's still supply and demand has been met, and hence the copper price is sitting around 3 ducats, just dipped below to 2.86 here. As you can imagine, 2.86 is a lot more than 0.2. And that's the thing with RGOs. They're also, well, look, they are affected by control, but they're not affected by market access. So this is just profitable to build in basically anywhere you have a core for the base 20% control. And anywhere close to your capital, especially in the early game where most RGOs start level 1, you want to be building them around your capital or future capital areas. They're going to be incredibly profitable and a great way of scaling your economy early. But alright, you've built the RGOs, what now? Well, next I'm going to introduce to you this concept from, dare I say, the ancient era, but one that you should still be applying, and that is going to be the palace economy. Namely, that you should be building your industries in either your capital or as close to your capital as possible. And your capital should also be, ideally, well, your actual capital. So if my capital was Dumfries and I was building around in Edinburgh, I should move it down to Edinburgh. And I should also have a market center on my capital. It is pretty important to obtain a market center, and let's talk about why now. So in Edinburgh, I have the market center giving me 100% market access, and I have 100% control in Edinburgh. This is great. This is basically the best case scenario. But anywhere that we go outside of Edinburgh, we're going to have less control and less market access. Now, one of the things that you may see if you're starting to read around the game is certain trade goods and certain production methods are going to have throughput bonuses. For example, this apothecary is making medications, and because it's making said medications with fiber crops, it's getting an 8% production efficiency bonus from fiber crops. This is good. However, we have to bear in mind that the control in this province isn't 100% because it's the capital. Now, the control here is pretty good. At 90, I'm not complaining. This is still a good, profitable endeavor to make, although in this case, I think, yeah, unfortunately, apothecaries have been a bit overproduced at the moment, but either way, let's look at guns instead. That always tends to be a profitable industry. Well, the control is already reducing your tax base by 10%. If you hover over taxes here, as you can see, the loss from control is reducing it by 10%. Market access, though, is a slow and insidious killer. And market access at 89% here is still really good, I would say. However, what does market access do? Well, it basically shoots most of the production efficiency you gain from local throughput in the foot. If you take a look at this output of guns here, market access is reducing it by 0.89, and that's at 90%, meaning that 11% of the guns would make disappear into the market access void. And again, 90% market access is pretty good, but if you are building something for 8% production efficiency and then losing 11% production efficiency just because you are losing 10 market access, well, that doesn't seem to be a good idea, and hence in practice, you should be building things in as close as possible to the market center as you can, and as close as possible to the capital as you can, to minimize the losses to both control, as well as to minimize the losses to market access. To give a more extreme example, over here in this province, the bourgeoisie for me built a saltpeter guild, which, I mean, is still profitable, so telling me I should invest more into saltpeter guilds because there's clearly a demand for saltpeter. But if we look at the actual output of saltpeter, we are reducing this by 0.58. So despite having a 8.3% production efficiency bonus from local throughput, we're losing half of our output simply because it's so far away from our market, meaning it'll be significantly better to shove it to Edinburgh, or if we're running low on building slots, to shove it around Edinburgh. By the way, for those who are wondering, so why don't you just build everything in your capital? Well, there is a building levels in every single province kind of limit, and once you exceed the total amount of buildings you can build in each province, it gets significantly more expensive to build further buildings. We'll get into the later tips, but this is the reason you can't 100% just have everything in your capital market center forever, right? However, until this building level is reached, and any kind of industry you are trying to build, whether it be silk, leather, spinners guilds, tool guilds, most of the time, it's better to put it in your capital and as close to the market center as you physically can. On a more later term purpose, as you start focusing on capital economy, getting more production efficiency bonuses, well, you'll be able to offset the lack of plus 10% from throughput and make up for it with other bonuses, like again, capital economy, land of commerce, increasing your literacy rates, and just having a lot of buildings in the local area. This is actually extra insidious for book production, as everyone in the game has access to a 25% production efficiency technology on books, meaning that local throughput on book production, increasing it by 10% in the ideal universe, is significantly less impactful all of a sudden. But okay, you've built your RGOs, you've stolen a market center or created your own market in your capital, and you build your capital up now. It's approaching the limit on buildings. The question now becomes, how do I keep going? How do I keep scaling? Well, for that, and tip number 3 is going to be expand in a core or ring around your original palace economy capital. This is still something that's in progress in this save. So if we take a look at our location ranks, we've upgraded Dumfries and Berwick, and we'll be working on Glasgow or Gleska over here, as well as building up industries over here because we have good proximity to them, and they're still going to be good places for us to urbanize and build up. I've also gone ahead and urbanized every single one of these other locations, and this is the second part of, well, the general planning and how you want to build up society. Workshops and other industry need pops to work in them, and while you certainly can encourage migration, this is another thing I'd recommend you do to get to the 30,000 pop limit required to upgrade to city. I've been a bit overzealous in Glasgow here, but I'm doing it to around 50k pops because the plan is to have quite a bit of industry over here when I eventually do upgrade. The reality of the situation is that you actually want per province at least one town and eventually city rank tile at least. The reason for that is that these locations that are urban are able to build granaries, and granaries provide you, when it comes to your demographic population growth, a large food storage and province modifier. This is important because rural locations also have a bonus for rural settlement location, but they're able to get the bonuses from large food storage. When combining this with keeping your food prices cheap, having a lot of available free land to population cap, you can get a pretty decent amount of population growth going. And look, 0.56% or even let's say 0.4 on a global level, as the population growth isn't great, if you take a look at my historical graph and ignore the couple of times I had to raise levies for wars and dismiss them, and a bit of a bumpy road to the process here, and this little spike that would be explained if you watch the later video, assuming that does happen for some of our literacy setup. There was some temporary gaining of land we had to give back. As you can see by the graph in general, population is definitely something you can work on, and especially after the effects of the Black Death when we're dipping down to like 150k pops, certainly recoverable. Yes, migration helps, but domestically growing your population, 0.1% per annual pop growth over the scope of 100 years does add up. The other thing, as you start to move out from your capital, is you're going to notice that both control as well as market access are impacted by the movement cost to your capital. So for this, of course, I'd recommend building roads. I now currently have the upgrade to pave roads, but I'm still not that rich. I have a lot more money to spend on road upgrades. As you can see, these things can get pretty expensive, even with some pretty decent discounts on them. But nevertheless, roads are good, and roads also decrease market access. And on the topic of roads, let's now talk about societal values. Focusing on centralization is great for decreasing proximity cost in general, and then picking land or naval can also be pretty good for going through control. I'm going to naval here because most of the Scottish locations are actually coastal, so therefore we're able to propagate eventually, well I say eventually, right now if we check our proximity map, a pretty decent amount of naval control everywhere and propagate that inland. Well, if you are doing that, just bear in mind market access still uses roads, so you still want to be building roads even if you're going naval. That said, whichever one is better is up to you and really depends more on your geography than it depends on your personal choice. For Scotland, I still recommend naval. I think it makes a bit more sense than land, but either way, both can be good, especially with land giving you max RGO size as well, and as we previously mentioned, RGO size is good. But either way, pick one of these to go down to centralization and build roads, and this is going to greatly increase both the average market access towards your provinces, as well as the control that you have. And this is what I mean by shaping society. Shape society to have more pops to actually work these extra jobs, build up urban centers, that is, if we take a look at our location ranks, around or close to your capital to move out some of the other industry and, well, make sure you don't go over the building levels because this makes buildings really expensive, trust me. This is the Shape Society top tip for continue to grow past the palace economy. But okay, you've built your palace economy, you've shaped society, and you've got a lot more production going. One of the things that you're going to start realizing is that as you start producing a lot of things like books, the demand for books is going to run out. And that's going to be true for anything you start mass producing, whether that's fine tailors cloths or tanneries or spinners guilds. Eventually, you're going to oversupply trade good and its price is going to crash, destroying the profitability from these buildings. And you don't want that. You still want to be making money. Well, for that, let me introduce to you the solution to your problems, the marketplaces. Build marketplaces and in any way, whether you're rural or urban, procure trade capacity. So if you are a more rural-based society, you have the option of building market villages. They are worse, giving 0.1 trade capacity per building instead of the marketplaces giving 1, and marketplaces being upgradable to merchant quarters. If we take a look at the merchant quarters, as you can see, same building but now gives 1.5 trade capacity to owner. Well, whichever way you go, hopefully eventually marketplaces get that. Because what these do is in essence equalize the global trade price of goods. If books are really cheap in your market, but books are really expensive elsewhere, you'll be able to export books there, decreasing the supply of books in your market and making money on arbitrage in the process. Now, first of all, trade income is just a good way of making money, right? And I've automated trade here. I'm not exactly microing it. And this is a non-trivial part of my income. Of my 381 ducats coming in, I am making 75 from trade. Definitely not bad, and covering all my building maintenance costs, absolutely. So that's good. That's the immediate reaction. But this is actually even better for your economy as a whole, because by equalizing the price of these trade goods, you're able to keep production of certain trade goods high and hence profitable, which lets you tax that production income even more. So you basically just have a win-win situation. Even in situations where you don't really want to be building around trade, you still kind of want to build around trade. Now, there is a silver lining here. If you completely ignore trade, the AI isn't going to. The AI is still going to build marketplaces, the AI is still going to be, sending trade expeditions, and unless you get embargoed by the world, the AI will, through their own trade, also help you equalize market pressures. Because if you have cloth that's really cheap in the Edinburgh market and it's really expensive elsewhere, well, people are just going to import it from the Edinburgh market to make a profit instead of you. This does also mean that you don't want to overbuild marketplaces. At some point, once you've built a decent chunk of them, all of the profitable trades would be taken, and as such, they start costing you money because the actual building maintenance for each marketplace can be pretty expensive. This is why I would say don't knock the rural marketplaces, because the rural marketplaces don't actually have a maintenance attached to them. That can be pretty good. But if you can afford the maintenance, and the maintenance of these actually gives you extra demand for high profit trade goods like jewelry, well, what's not to love? Either way, building marketplaces is a pretty important way of just maintaining profitability of your industries as a whole, by just normalizing the global price of trade goods everywhere. You really don't have to micro this, by the way. It's absolutely fine to shove it on automatic. Ironically, I've taken the most profitable trades is basically normalizing the greatest inequalities in supply and demand of the global markets. That said, though, there is only so much you can do by exporting to other countries. They will also build their own buildings, they will also build their own industries, they will also build up and, make their own profitable tailors guilds and leather tanneries and spinners guilds, right? So there are limits to how much you can go with this. And to kind of bypass that, we need to go into step number 5, our final piece of the economy, and it's something that I've only started just doing it in this save because I haven't really had to, but it's still something I'm already starting to consider. And that is going to be create your own demand. At the end of the day, places like universities, temples, hospitals, chanceries, libraries, wharfs, military infrastructure like castles, sergeantries, armories, all have really expensive building maintenance upkeep. What you need to bear in mind is for every single building, you as the crown pay 20% of the building maintenance, and this scales with your crown power. So a high amount of crown power, as you can see, can decrease building upkeep costs significantly as well. Nevertheless, this is a great way of creating demand for your economy, and you're able to tax this demand, sometimes even in extreme cases at a profit. In essence, building up a lot of armories that consume a lot of leather and cloth and paper and weapons, then building a lot of those industries while then taxing those industries is literally a free money technique. And it also goes without saying that expensive buildings like universities, like temples, like hospitals don't exist just to produce demand. They have pretty helpful outputs as well, like local max literacy modifiers, as you can see here, monthly literacy growth, migration attraction, and pop promotion speed. This is all helpful, especially that local culture influence as well. So certainly if you're winning, this is how you win harder, but don't forget this is a part of winning harder. Spending money is important for making money if you're a government. Now, it doesn't work on a personal level, don't get me wrong, but on a government level, maintaining demand for the trade goods that you're producing is a good way to ensure that these industries stay open, stay profitable, and definitely stay taxable, which is what you want to be doing. With that said, I've certainly been using Scotland as this example, but you definitely don't need to do this in Scotland. You can do this pretty much everywhere else. And while I did focus on a more capital economy, most of this advice still applies even in a very rural, heavy traditional economy, because a lot of the rural buildings I'm not building, your market villages, still have production methods and things they are producing, albeit significantly less efficiently as the game goes on. What's kind of funny actually is in 1337, I think market villages are sometimes even more efficient than the city-based buildings, but these can never really be upgraded. However, as you start getting more fancy workshops, for example, level 2 printer shops instead of the level 1 scriptoriums, yeah, the capital economy certainly starts to take over, especially by the time you're hitting the 1700s. Either way, regardless of what you're doing, I hope these tips are still general enough for you to apply in your own games. But with that said, there's unfortunately all the time I have for you today. Thank you very much for watching, with a special thank you to all my channel members, especially Ark, Solar, Lemon, Lord Zendika, Nekas, Nanhatan, Star72, The Awesome Rabbit, Best Pro Gaming, Grandma Flavia, Barule, W Haste, Sov, Anthony35, AC Napa, Conspiracy Pizza, Yukata, Dunray, Malvi, Jack, Ryland, Stuart Allen, Andrew Black, Nebula, Zentronic, and Twynet.